I had set out to review the first half of the anime and manga, but I found there wasn't much to review. Sandland's just good. If you needed to hear someone say that to go check it out, the anime is on Hulu and the manga can be found on Viz. I recommend both. The visuals of the anime build on the same style used in the Dragon Ball Super Superheroes movie, so if you like that look, you'll love it for Sandland. It's a definite evolution in the style. The manga has solid art through its 14-chapter run, and was drawn entirely by Akira Toriyama. The characters are fun, the story is solid, there's plenty to enjoy and little to critique. Instead, I decided to see what changes were made in adapting the story. And that's where I noticed something peculiar about the changes. An undertone to the series that added a new dimension to the story. But we'll get back to that. Sandland was written back in 2000 by the legendary Akira Toriyama. King Yima watch over him. This was the manga he thought had the best art and that he put the most work into. Apparently Kawa was his favorite manga though. Gotta remember to check that out. Sandland is a short and straightforward story about an old man demon, and a demon prince on their quest to find a hidden spring of water in their post-apocalyptic desert. Okay, that sounds weird, but I expect no less from Toriyama. So, to start, we'll go through the differences of the anime and the manga as they happened, recapping some of the story. After that, I'll talk about the real big change. It's a weird thing most people would miss. I'll only be covering the first 6 episodes in the anime here, because that's what's adapted from the manga. If you haven't already, check out the series before listening to the rest of this, because spoilers. The adaptation switches things up right from the start. Where the manga gives us clear images of the demons during their water heist, the anime shrouds them in darkness. 3 demons share a silhouette, creating a terrifying image. The heavy breathing and distorted visuals makes us feel like we're seeing through the eyes of a slasher villain. For all the suspense to be yanked out from beneath us when Beelzebub gets shot. This change makes great use of the new medium, but downplays the punchline of Beelzebub. Tears in his eyes, saying, "That hurt," after being shot. He shakes off the shot much easier in the anime, maintaining the demon's menace for the opening. A small but notable addition is how one of the truck guards muses about how he wants to see action. He was trained to be a soldier, and he gets excited hearing they're in demon territory. After the demons attack, he fires repeatedly while screaming in fear to a nonchalant, "We're only taking some," from his attackers. While the juxtaposition of their attitudes makes for a great joke, the change does something important here. Something we'll get back to later. One of the best changes in the anime is seeing Sheriff Rao's town. Being able to see how much his people need water, that they don't have enough for their livestock, crops, or even themselves. This really helps show why Rao is setting out on this journey and just how important it is. A smaller change inside this section is when they show the king's ad for the water price, and the currency is different. The manga was 900 yen for a half-liter bottle, while the anime was 17,500 zenny. 900 yen is almost $6 at time of writing, by the way. The shop clerk notes how the kingdom doesn't send water this far out, helping show early how neglectful their government is. Showing Rao's town added a lot to the story. Things that are implied in the manga or spoken about could now be shown to us. Like Rao seeing the water finch, which lets him know there must be a spring towards the south based on their migratory habits. Or the kid in Rao's village who was given water by the demon. This tells us why he would go to the demons for help. These are small things that give the story more impact. It shows how much care this team put into adapting the story, something Toriyama noted when seeing the early animations. Rao goes to the demons for help finding a spring. The name of that spring will depend on if you're watching or reading the story. In the manga it was the Phantom Spring, while the anime used Legendary Spring. I think Phantom has a more whimsical connotation, but Legendary feels like they're on a quest. In a way, these help define the 2 versions. Rao believes that he can work with the demons because one of them gave a kid water, and the kid drew a picture of that demon. To which Beelzebub says, "It looks nothing like him," crumpling the picture, revealing he's the one that gave the kid water. Obviously, an act of kindness is unbecoming of a demon. This feels like a gag Toriyama would have come up with. To convince the demons, Rao needs to bribe Beelzebub with a game console that survived the apocalypse. In the manga, this was a PlayStation 6, and it had the game Dragon Quest XIII, which means we've still got some time before the apocalypse. The anime just mentions it having games, and the console's unmarked. Before this was a quick scene of Slime dying. In the anime, Beelzebub revives it by pouring water on it. The manga just leaves Slime dead. I do like how Toriyama put in the little references to his work on the Dragon Quest games. After Rao gifts the gaming console, they ask King Lucifer for permission to help a human. One of the demons tries to scare off Rao with the smell of a poop cacti. Yeah, that also feels like a Toriyama joke. The poop cacti returns in the finale, by the way. Last thing for the first episode. The demons held a talent show to see who would accompany Rao and Beelzebub before they set off on their adventure. Honestly, this is just an excuse for some rapid-fire gags about the demons and how none of them want to go on the mission. My favorite was Centaur accidentally showing how he's a really good archer, and then being relieved when they said he's too big to fit in the Jeep. The talent show also illustrates how lazy the demons got, and why they wouldn't be useful on the mission. But it also keeps the scene where Thief says how useful a flying demon would be. It stays faithful to the manga, but it does make it a little repetitive. With episode 2, I do have a critique of the adaptation. I think this is due to how they extend or explore some scenes, and their slightly more serious tone. But watching the anime, I kept wondering how strong Beelzebub is supposed to be. We're repeatedly told that the demons are stronger than humans, and the other demons listen to him, so we presume he's stronger than those demons. But the only hints of his strength were when he got shot, or when he says he can't beat the Genji dragon. We know a gun doesn't do much to him, but he's weaker than a giant sand monster. That is a canyon-sized gap. And we never see Beelzebub do anything until episode 2, when a gang of thugs pops their tires and tries to rob them. He easily beat the thugs, but Rao was doing the same until they pulled a gun on him. If anything, the scene shows how tough Rao is, which is probably the point. This is an issue I have only for the anime. The manga moves much faster and doesn't have the talent show to make the demons seem goofier. I didn't feel the need to question Beelzebub's strength reading the series, but I couldn't stop asking while watching it. Also, seeing Beelzebub take out the thugs in the manga is way more impressive, because it happens all in one panel instead of slapping one goon after the other like in the anime. There aren't any noteworthy changes as they go to town and steal the tank, nothing until the tank battle with the airplane. When Beelzebub gets Thief's help to lift the tank, it shows us that the demons are strong enough to lift a tank weighed 1,562 kilograms. So I guess Beelzebub can lift half of that? Or because Thief is old and has a bad back, maybe Beelzebub was doing most of the lifting? We know he's strong, but it's still not clear how strong he is. This is only a problem for me because I was already trying to figure it out on my first watch through. I doubt most people will be as bothered as I was. When they shot down the plane, the water it was carrying was worth 600 million yen in the manga, and 6 billion zenny in the anime. This yen to zenny conversion rate's screwy. The king's sale price went from 900 yen to 17,500 zenny, and to make things weirder, the king offers to pay 3 million yen for their capture, or 30 million zenny in the anime. Jumping ahead, the swimmers will sell a photo of Rao for 200,000 yen in the manga, or 2 million zenny in the anime. Why is it usually a factor of 10, except for the first price? Can someone good at math explain the conversion rate here? Enough with money. Episode 3 adds context to Rao's backstory by showing his big mission in the military. Leading the tanks against the Pishi Uprising, they show us the town he lived in, his home, and the myriad of photos on the wall. We see his wife by the window, and we'll see it all be destroyed. I'll talk more about this edition later. A few changes were made to the photo of Rao's wife in the tank. For one, the manga photo has the name Sexy Terrier written on it, whereas the anime uses her proper name, Terrier Shiva. Of course, Thief still calls her Sexy Terrier. The more noticeable change is the overhaul of her style. The manga uses something more revealing, and the anime gives her a classier outfit, something like a singer at a nightclub. The aforementioned swimmers are a criminal family who seem out of place in a desert. I can feel the sunburn just looking at them. But they sell a photo of Rao to the press, and the military tracks them to find Rao's location. The swimmers then fire an explosive between Rao's tank and General Are's approaching 4 tanks to trick them into fighting. A really good change in the anime is how they handled the big tank battle. It's much more dramatic here, especially as they reveal that Rao has positioned the sun behind his tank so the enemy can't see him. This was a moment where being able to watch everything play out really benefits it. Rao felt like a tactical genius when we saw what was happening. The manga and the anime versions both have their strengths, but I think this was a big win for the anime. Episode 4 continues the tank battle and extends it by adding a battle with General Are. In the manga, Are surrendered after 3 of his 4 tanks were disabled. I like how sensible Are can be, and that he can admit defeat to Rao, but seeing them fight before the surrender was incredibly entertaining. Especially how the tank barrels crossed at the end. like a fencing match, but with tanks. Now, the weirdest change of them all, or at least the strangest translation. When Beelzebub chases down the swimmers after the battle, one of them says he can run 180 kilometers per hour in the anime. In the manga, he says he can run over 100 miles per hour. Why is this the only point in either version of Sandland that they use American measurements? Everything else is meters or yen, but this one and only moment, it uses freedom units? May as well have said how many football fields he can run in an hour. Anyways, after the battle, Supreme Commander Zeus scolds RA for not stopping Rao. Episode 5 adds to Zeus' outrage. There's more of an effort to guilt trip RA into following orders, and it mentions that Zeus raised him after his father died. His father died because of Zeus, but RA hasn't come to terms with that yet. Zeus reminds him that he brought RA up through the ranks, and that he needs to be thankful to him. Another thing to get back to. This scene has a lot of changes to it. In the manga, RA hangs up on Zeus, but the anime shows his betrayal as something that weighs heavily on his mind. He hears out Zeus, and thinks of his father looking at a picture of the two of them before he died. The manga portrays RA's betrayal as this immediate turnaround. RA learns the truth and confirms it by tricking the king over radio. Then when he reports to Zeus, he pretends they're static and hangs up to immediately radio Rao and tell him the location of the king's water source, which he does with the same subtlety as Goku when he wants to fight somebody. The anime, however, draws this out as a tough decision he really needs time to figure out. Meanwhile, Beelzebub and the others find a hidden spring where the surviving Peachy live. I'll let you pick apart the differences in their living conditions if you want to see that. When Rao hears the survivors in the anime, he pushes everybody to leave and takes a moment to bow and apologize to the Peachy, wishing for them to live in peace. Then they have a conversation about everybody forgetting what they saw. In the manga, all that happens before they leave the spring, including Rao's apology. I kinda wish one version had Rao apologize directly to them, but if the Peachy saw him, I'm sure it'd be like a Jewish person seeing Hitler, and then Hitler trying to apologize to them. Yeah, probably best Rao left quietly. In the tank, Rao asks not to be called Shiva, and Beelzebub says he doesn't need to call him the prince then. This conversation sadly doesn't happen in the manga, but I think it's a sweet one which shows how much they've grown closer to each other. Zeus gets an image of the three from a downed plane, and yells that he doesn't care about pilots who were shot down. The plane was added in the anime. In the manga, Zeus learns of Beelzebub's involvement from a description from the news office instead of an actual image. They really highlight Zeus' callousness in the anime. Something to remember. It's after this General RA does decide to betray Zeus in the anime. After taking time to think it over, RA puts out a message which discloses the location of the king's water source and relieves the guards of duty. So nice of him to give them that much needed R&R. In contrast, the manga handles this clunkily, with RA saying he's talking to himself over the radio and saying the guards would already be off duty. It's much more passive, and I don't think there's a good enough joke to make up for that. Whereas the anime is confident. RA is taking a stand, and then tells his men that this was done entirely by him, and that they should essentially throw him under the bus. It's odd that the manga can have RA's decision move so much faster, and yet still come across as so passive. Maybe that's why the joke didn't land for me. The one benefit the manga version had here was Rao responding to the message, saying he was also just talking to himself, and that there are still noble hearts in the king's army, and that it gave him hope. The anime still communicates this sentiment. When Thief calls RA foolish, thinking he didn't know they were listening in, Rao tells him that RA does know, still showing that understanding between the two. The final change of episode 5 comes when they reach the king's dam, and find the water source with the appearance of the insect man, or insect men in this case. Yep, in the manga, there's only one insect man instead of the horde we see in the anime. I kinda got that feeling when I was watching it. Something about the dialogue and the actions made it feel like there was only supposed to be one. Also, look how the Insect Man is delivered in the manga. That's just hilarious. Sure, the mobile fortress is cooler, but just look at that. An old cyborg man shaped like a pear with a cage dangling underneath him. That mobile fortress looks like it was supposed to be the torso of a giant robot, by the way. That doesn't really fit with any of this, I just had to say it. Okay, episode 6, almost there. A lot is added here, starting with Thief and Rao getting an infiltration mission into the mobile fortress that should have been a Megazord. This is where those poop cacti return, by the way, as a callback to how Rao steals the tank. Beelzebub's fight with the insect men gets extended a lot, and it's all the better for it. It feels more like a final boss fight at the end of an adventure. Everything after the point of RA shooting Zeus with his tank was added. The manga has Zyu threaten to bomb them, and then he gets shot by the tank. Next, they're breaking the dam. The anime, however, gives Rao a climactic final battle with Zyu, and Zyu escaping with a core fighter mode after RA shoots him. This change makes everything more dramatic. The manga's ending is funny, but I think the big battle fits better for animation. But I'll get back to that. Oh yeah, Zyu also explodes and dies instead of team rocketing away. So no one dies in the anime, at least not in the present. The manga wraps up with a 10 days later moment where we see Rao visiting the demons and the swimmers getting to swim in the restored river. But the anime teases a new story, which I'll finally get to watch after finishing this project. Okay, that's most of the changes. If you want to know more of them, I'll list the others I noticed in the description. Now we can finally get back to all those other points, so I can finally elaborate on what the anime really added. Let me stress, I don't think this was intended by the original author. Toriyama wrote very silly and free-spirited most of the time. He could write dark and serious moments, and those moments have always helped balance out his stories, but it's never what he's focused on. What I'm about to talk about is something I think the people adapting the story added because they saw the potential of it in the original. Themes that Toriyama used more as set dressing, the anime chose to make into the undertone for the series. Themes which are deeply rooted in modern Japanese history. Near the end of World War II, starting in 1944, the Tokyo air raids began. The first phase of these air raids were done from high altitude and targeted military facilities and affiliated industries. The second phase, beginning January of 1945 and lasting until August of the same year, was a different beast altogether. These bombing runs were done at low altitude in the dead of night. Japanese civilians were bombed indiscriminately. 98% of Tokyo's buildings were made of wood and paper at the time. The firebombings killed 100,000 people, injured 100,000 more, and left over 1 million people without a home. On top of this were the 2 nuclear bombings of Nagasaki and Hiroshima. You're definitely wondering why I jumped from the silly show starring the shirtless cape-wearing demon all the way over to Japan's greatest tragedy in living memory. Well, that's because it's the greatest tragedy in living memory. A study on the air raids shows how the destroyed districts are still feeling the impact of the firebombings 80 years later. Modern Japanese culture is shaped by the scars of those bombings. The American military made itself instrumental in Japan's post-war reconstruction, to the point that General MacArthur forced the Japanese government to swear off war. Article 9 of their constitution states that the Japanese people forever renounce war. Not having a military was unthinkable at the time, but MacArthur refused to budge on it, and the Japanese officials begrudgingly agreed. While their laws and constitution may have said everything was better now, the Japanese people still had a long way to go. Wartime propaganda built up their soldiers as invincible heroes. The kamikaze pilots were heralded as war gods before their departure, but when pilot Masayuki Shimada returned after his plane crashed due to an oil leak, his superior only had contempt for the survivor. He regretted surviving and wished to complete his mission, but after his cold welcome, he realized the Japanese military only saw the pilots as another part in the plane. The Japanese people were shamed on the global stage after the war. Their returning soldiers were treated with disdain, and the people's faith in their government was shattered when the emperor announced the surrender. Many believed the emperor to be descended from a goddess. Many soldiers believed they were winning the war, and early victories of the empire against China in 1895 and Russia in 1905 had built up this image of an invincible empire with its divine emperor at the head, and strict censorship by the American occupation made it impossible for the Japanese people to reconcile their new reality. To quote John Hersey of The New Yorker, "In the localities themselves, suffering was compounded not merely by the unprecedented nature of the catastrophe, but also by the fact that public struggle with this traumatic experience was not permitted." That was from an article entitled Hiroshima, written in 1946. While watching the Sandland adaptation, I often found myself thinking back to the movie Godzilla Minus One. A movie set in the immediate aftermath of the air raids, which highlights the lasting destruction from the firebombings. It shows the suffering of everyday people and the shame and trauma of the returning soldiers. The original Godzilla movie personified the unstoppable power of the atomic bomb, and how powerless the military was to stop it. The movie's anti-militaristic views could only be released thanks to the end of the strict US-imposed censorship. A trend in Japanese media was born, stories where they could work through those scars. Many other movies and anime would take on themes dealing with war, such as the Gundam franchise. But as we can see with recent movies like -1, those scars have still not healed. Those scars can be seen in how Sandland was adapted, starting with its first scene. The truck guard who says he's a soldier trained for battle, that he wants to fight. Against the overwhelming might of the demons, they stood no chance. Even their guns were useless against the creatures of myth. Of course, this is a Toriyama work. The guard being scared as soon as he gets what he asked for is a pretty funny joke, but it's also reminiscent of the message in the original Godzilla. The military and violence don't solve everything. Godzilla was a problem the military was useless against, but science could kill it. It also shows the double-edged sword that science is, able to heal people with medicine, create faster transportation, or larger and deadlier weapons. In Sandland, we see the Pishi wiped out by the military because they were about to solve a crisis with science. They could have created water to end the drought, but the king and General Ziyu ordered their destruction to maintain their monopoly. Wouldn't it be the first time the military has been used for capital's interests? All you have to do is say, oil, in another country and the US military will roll in. It was that first scene where the guard wants to see action that made me connect Sandland to -1. Without spoiling -1 too much, one of the younger characters missed his chance to fight in the war. He was always eager to prove himself, but the rest of the characters, men who did see combat, knew it was better he hadn't seen the war, like the truck guard, who quickly learns how terrifying battle really is. With the context of Japan's scars from World War II and its continued impact in their cultural zeitgeist, I don't think it's too much of a stretch to compare the added scene of Rao's home from 30 years ago to the destruction from the air raids. More specifically, I would compare that to one of the nuke drops. An enormous, unstoppable explosion that wiped out an entire city. I think it's harder not to draw that parallel. The only way to make the parallel more obvious would have been if Rao kept questioning why he lived when the others didn't. But this is Sandland. I don't think they wanted to be that serious with it. While they didn't deal with survivor's guilt, the adaptation did weaponize guilt. More specifically, obligation and repayment. November 3rd, 1937. The Japanese government required all citizens and colonial subjects to bow in the direction of the imperial palace. They had to hold this pose for 1 minute in silence to honor the anniversary of Emperor Meiji's birthday. This was the beginning of the government's efforts to propagandize its people and promote the fervent nationalism that would come. Many such efforts, like the requirement of citizens to journal their thoughts and strict censorship, would be used to great effect. But one of the most effective was the co-opting of the benefaction, gratitude, obligation, repayment cycle. Man, what a mouthful. Is that easier to say in Japanese or something? Because this was one of the most effective tactics. The principles of this cycle were almost universal in Japanese society. To oversimplify it, you get a gift, you're thankful, and you're obligated to repay that gift. It was taught that the emperor was the supreme benefactor. Thus, all citizens should show him gratitude and work to repay him. This propaganda was also used by the military to keep public support of the war. We can see Ziyu using this same principle against General R.A. when R.A. starts questioning what happened at the explosion. Ziyu reminds him who raised R.A. after his father died and who put him into the high rank of general. Ziyu is saying that he's the benefactor and thus cannot be questioned. R.A. need only be grateful and is obligated to repay Ziyu's work. Ziyu justifies his abhorrent actions with the same idea. He is the benefactor of all Sandland because he brought peace to it. I don't know how everyone dying of thirst is peace, but that's what Ziyu calls it. The anti-war themes aren't exclusive to the anime. Toriyama makes a point to show that the demons aren't the bad guys in all this. They take pride in being meanies, but they also give kids water and, very importantly, never kill. When Beelzebub's bragging about how bad he is, it's mostly things a kid would do. He didn't brush his teeth and stayed up past his bedtime, oh no. The demons are superpowered tricksters at worst. You could even call them heroes. The other thing Beelzebub brags about, his opening actions, are Robin Hood-like. He steals from the rich king, takes only as much as they need, and still shares some water with humans. On top of that, Beelzebub apparently has a habit of beating up criminal gangs like the Swimmers. May as well call him Batman, he's another rich kid fighting crime with a no-kill code. Toriyama makes a point that the demons, or at least Beelzebub, are the good guys. And when they hear that Rao has killed men, they start sweating bullets. Thief even makes multiple comments about how foolish humans are for going to war, even in the apocalypse. Ziyu's peace in the anime comes from him putting an end to war without ever asking the cost. Now would be a good time to look at what Rao and Ziyu represent. Rao is explicitly shown as being a man acting on his own. Thief asked him in their first meeting if he was working under the king, And Rao answers that it was his own idea and their lousy king only cares about his profits. Rao is framed as working outside and even adversarial to the government from the start. When the anime showed us Rao's hometown, it altered that framing. Now he was also carrying everyone's hope. He represented an entire community. The sight of his town and the people's struggle in the face of an uncaring government was also another connection I made with Godzilla Minus One, a thought that would be cemented in my head going forward. Rao wasn't always like this, however. He used to be a weapon of the government that he now stands against. When he fights General R.A. and his men, he sees himself in them, misguided the way he used to be. When R.A. wishes to know the truth of the explosion that killed his father, he refuses to hear it from a demon. At the start of the story, we saw Rao have similar misgivings about the demons. Rao believed that demons were the source of human tragedy and disaster because that's what the legends said. But Beelzebub and Thief show him otherwise. What hurts the humans, like the river drying up, will hurt the demons too. And over the course of the story, they're able to build trust with each other, a point the anime emphasizes in the climax. Zyu, on the other hand, represents the government that wronged Rao and the people of Sandland. The king is said to be a figurehead and shown to rely on Zyu. In effect, Zyu is the government itself. Zyu is callous towards his subordinates and towards the citizens of Sandland. When these two fight, Rao risks his life trying to save the soldiers who were shooting at him because he didn't want them caught in Zyu's bomb. Throughout the series, we see military men show Rao respect based on his actions, and the demons show him respect for his kindness and understanding. Zyu, however, demands respect. He claims to be the benefactor who brought peace and stability, but that peace and stability comes from damming the water supply, and Zyu expects them to thank him for this. He believes they are obligated to do so. Zyu, if not a representation, is reminiscent of Imperial Japan, demanding respect while letting his people, expecting them to die for him. He is the cruelty of World War II Japan, while Rao is a man who learned too late to question orders. Like the pilot of Godzilla Minus One, and the real-life citizens of post-war Japan, Rao lost everything and struggled to move forward, and R.A., the next generation who was raised to be a cog in Zyu's machine, another part in his tanks, parallels the real-world children who had been so heavily propagandized that they swore revenge in the aftermath of the war and were ready to wage the next one. Thanks to the work of Professor Yamashita, who collected 200 diaries written during the war, we can get insight into the mind of the average citizen of the time. These diaries faced heavy censorship from the state when they were written, meaning many could only communicate their true feelings through passive aggression. The diaries show that there were doubts about winning the war starting in 1943, especially by women, and that these doubts were amplified when the kamikaze attacks became public knowledge in October 1944. From these diaries, we can see that the children were the most vengeful over the war's end, at least in the immediate aftermath. Even a girl as young as 9 wrote that she'd seek revenge against the British and Americans. A college student working in the Imperial headquarters at the time wrote that they, the students, would be the next warriors. I'm unsure if this was meant as a literal next war, or in the terms of a developmental or scientific war. The reason for this youthful rage is quite simple. The children were the ones most targeted by the propaganda. An empire will always need more soldiers, and the state was preparing the next generation to be the volunteers in their war. The Japanese government had been hard at work manipulating its people since the Meiji Restoration, in attempts to homogenize Japan's national identity. The dominant ethnicity of Japan is the Yamato people, who in the modern day make up almost the entirety of Japan's ethnic identity, due to the actions of the pre-war government. The state was very effective at manipulating their population. General R.A. represents the younger generation that had been manipulated by the state, Zyu, into joining the military and carrying out its will without question or hesitation, at least until Rao and the demons opened his eyes. Before that moment, R.A. appears to be a clear-cut bad guy. He flies around in an illegal aircraft hauling valuable and much-needed water, and swears vengeance after defeat like a Saturday morning cartoon villain. After accepting his graceful defeat, however, R.A. starts becoming more sympathetic. He even comes around to the demons and hears them out. By the end, Rao has passed on his knowledge and his empathy and decides to retire. R.A. is the man that Rao trusts to lead the kingdom once despot Zyu has been overthrown. R.A. represents the hope for a better future and the younger generation's ability to learn from the mistakes of the past and to move forward. At the end of the day, Sandland is just a short story about an old man and a tank. But a good story is never so simple. Writers are influenced by the things around them and their own experiences. It's not far-fetched to assume that Toriyama was influenced by such an impactful period of his country's history, or that the team who adapted his work would have built on the themes of that history. But to someone who isn't connected to that history, it's an easy thing to miss. Knowing the depressing history isn't needed to appreciate this story, but I think it helps us understand it a little bit more. Now I can finally watch that other half. Wonder if these themes will be present in that news story too.